we've done it without them. We've done it with just somebody using the
Okay.
Zoom app on their cell phone. We've done it before.
How
Uh,
long have you been doing this?
about 3 years, just over 3 years
Oh,
here.
must be fun. Must be fun.
It is, yeah. And as I often joke, that's kind of all I get out of it is fun. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, really, lately I'm telling you, I don't know about you, but I've been writing for a very long time, and I'm getting kind of like, do you ever, I don't know what your life is like, but I just feel like I've been obsessed with writing for 40 years. And I just feel like I just kind of, just incidentally, I'm just kind of like thinking, my God, maybe there's more to life than writing. Do you
Yeah.
ever think that? What do you do for?
It's increasingly well, it's like what is the value of writing in an illiterate world, you know? What is the point of it in a world where nobody's reading except for a very small chunk? Nobody's buying the books except for a very small chunk of the population. We're talking 1 to 3% of the population is buying and reading most of the books. Yeah, it does. There's a discouraging aspect to it. And I think the younger generations definitely feel that. So I said, if you're feeling that, somebody who's made a career out of it, for many years,
Well,
yeah,
I can't say that that's why I'm feeling it. Because I feel like being a writer is really something ultimately you do for yourself. And and I mean, I know a lot of writers are obsessed with success and readership, and that's not where I'm coming from at all. Um, what are you smoking there? It's interesting.
I'm don't smoke anymore. Well, I smoke cigars occasionally, but I vape
Oh,
and I
okay.
do the nicotine supplement thing, the pouches to not smoke.
Oh, yeah, I
But
smoked for years, and my
yeah.
lungs are really not good for it. Um, anyway, so for me, it's really a matter of my life and looking at it. And I don't, I mean, of course, this world we live in is a nightmare. It's just we're living in a nightmare now, right? In every aspect. I'm getting my water.
Heavy,
Bored.
heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Whitstadt, and you were listening to Heavy Board. And we're recording this on October 11th, 2025. My guest today is the author Maxine Rosaler. Maxine has been a freelance journalist. She's worked as an editor, and Maxine is also a writer. Her latest book is titled The Missing Kidney, out just this year, a collection of short stories centered around the New York City of the 1970s and 1980s. The New York Times Book Review said readers can quench their thirst for witty stories and smart-ass narrators. And the book has appeared on Oprah's 2025 Best Summer Reads list this year. Maxine's work has appeared in the Southern Review, Glimmer Train, and many others. And she is here today to join us on Heavy Board. Maxine Roessler, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
Hi there, Andrew. Pleasure to be here. It's Rosaler, by the way. Okay.
Uh,
Thanks. Holler and Rose and Holler. Okay.
okay.
Which is kind of a good metaphor, right, for a
Uh,
person.
of
Okay.
course. And Maxine, the first question we ask all artists and writers that come onto this podcast is we like to know, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did these early years start to form Maxine?
Well, that's a very good beginning for a question. Okay, well, I can say that I grew up in Long Island, which is in New York. And I hated it there. I thought it was very boring, and my entire childhood, even, I wanted to leave there. And I wanted to move to the city. My dream was always to live in New York City. And I was always looking for something out of the ordinary there. And the only thing that there was there was the swamp, because the development, which, where my parents got our house, which is where we lived throughout my entire childhood and adolescence, was built on swampland. And so my sister, my twin sister, and I used to go to the swamp and fall in accidentally on purpose. And then it was paved over, and then the only place to go was the playground. So I felt very out of place, I'd say, throughout my entire childhood. My parents were both very well educated. My father was, always wanted to be a writer, and because of his years in the army, he ended up in advertising, which was something he did not want to do. And I would say that throughout my life, I was really obsessed with the tragedy of his life, because I felt that he hadn't fulfilled himself, and this really disturbed me. It seemed to me like a tragedy. And he died very at a young age, just before his 58th birthday, and I'd say that the life he led kind of killed him. So anyway, so that was my childhood, and I had identical twin sister. I'm actually in the process of finishing up two novels I'm writing. One of which is really about very much about my relationship with her, and my life was um, very much the course of my life was very much um, determined and directed by my relationship with my sister. She was damaged. Her brain was damaged at the age of 5. And so she was very depressed, and so I became her caretaker. So that really very much formed who the kind of person I became, which was very much a caretaker. And then tragically enough, ironically enough, I had a son with autism. And so I became his caretaker. I wrote a novel about that, called Queen for a Day, which was published in 2018, I think it was. Yes. And so that's really basically what it is. And then I went off to college. Very random. My choice of colleges was very random. And I would say that I was very lost until I became a writer. I always wanted to be a writer. I'd say that, since I was in third grade, when I was in third grade, I wrote my first novel. And then when my parents guessed the ending of it, I was so humiliated, I just didn't pursue it. And then I always worked as a writer. And then it wasn't really until I met my husband, when I was 32, that I really devoted myself to writing fiction. And I also write essays. Um, and um, and he was, it was kind of it was what is it? Can I say it's fate? I don't know. I don't believe in fate. But I actually had started my first short story after years of having been obsessed with writing, and thinking, having ideas and never really writing them down. And I had just already written my first story when I met him, and he was a writer. He published a wonderful novel called Belcora. It was a historical novel. Um, and so he really loved my writing, and so from then on, that was what my life has been about. That and taking care of my son.
Yeah. So you said your father was in the military?
Yeah, he was the first person drafted in his town. Um,
Was
and
this
he
World War
was
II?
during World War II, yeah. And I would say that it really ruined his life. He spent 6 years I think it was 6 years in the army. Um, and um, and it just took him off course.
So did he stay in after the war then too? If like
Well,
six
he
years?
actually he actually taught. He was a lieutenant colonel, and he taught in the reserves. Every summer he would go away and teach, which I thought was something that he enjoyed because he was, he really should have been a teacher, an English professor. And so that was something, actually, so that was something he got out of it, but it basically took him off course. Yes. So it was, so I would say that throughout my childhood, I was kind of like very obsessed with the tragedy of two people's lives. My father's life. Also, my mother was very abusive to him and to her, to him and to me, and to my sister to a slightly lesser degree. So that was tragic. And then my sister, who was very gifted, and her life was completely sent off course because of falling off the monkey bars when she was 5. Um, so, so I would say that very much those were very strong influences on me.
Yeah, and you said he then he moved to advertising. So was this the famous Madison Avenue
No,
advertising, or
no, it was really not. I mean, I think he started off there, but then he got another job and he was hard, he stayed the same job for 35 years, and it was just, advertising director of an import-export company. And it was really, I just couldn't imagine ever doing that. And I would say that the example of his example very much influenced my sister and my brother. I have an older brother, and all of us just completely avoided any kind of real work, world of real work. For us, it was anathema, right? So I always avoid, like any career opportunity I was ever offered, like when I was a reporter for a community newspaper, I was offered a job being head of press relations for someone who's running for Congress. I rejected that. I just didn't want any real job. I was afraid of having a real job. And so I think, in my heart of hearts, I always knew I wanted to be a writer. And that's really the only thing I've ever been able to commit myself to. And then for all my writing jobs, which weren't very interesting, I mean, when I was a reporter for a community newspaper, that was interesting. But I was really honing my craft. I would really made everything that I wrote about into a work of art. So, as I often tell people, looking back on my life, I often thought that I was wasting my life not writing what I wanted to write about. But then on reflection, I realized that I really, really was honing my craft, and I became a very skillful writer. And it takes a long time to really be skillful as a writer, and that's certainly a very important part of it. And I'm very much attached to prose style. I really can't bear bad prose style. I can't read anything that doesn't have good prose style. And so what can I say? I guess it wasn't all a waste. And now I'm 74 years old, and 32 doesn't seem like so young, so old.
right? Of course, yeah. And
Okay.
what did your mother do? What did your mother do? She a stay-at-home mom or what? What?
Yeah, my mother was very smart. She was a college graduate too. And um, and she really should have had a she shouldn't have been a mother. She should have had a career. So she was very frustrated by her life, I feel. And she sort of wanted to live vicariously through, I'd say mostly me. And since I wasn't pursuing what she wanted to pursue, like she would have wanted me to be like on television doing interviews, stuff like that, or, something in the world of work, the commercial world, and I had no interest in that. And so she was very disappointed in me. And and I think she was disappointed in herself for sure, and in the way um, her life, the way her life turned out. My father didn't have a big career, but she was pretty happy with herself in a way. She was always reading, always doing crossword puzzles. She was cheerful, but very abusive,
Yeah. There's,
verbally abusive. Yeah.
and this was you said you're in your 70s, so you're a baby boomer. Was this the 60s when you were growing up
Yeah,
mostly?
yeah. Well,
60s,
so I was growing up in the, 50s and 60s,
50s and 60s,
like
yeah.
I went to graduate high school in 69.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and so she was, yeah, so she was very rough on me, and and I never really acknowledged that. In fact, I was really very much, I'd say, in denial. I feel like I really felt like I had a happy childhood. I felt like my mother loved me. And I really, I'm dealing with this in one of the, I have two novels I'm working on. One is called Blame It on My Youth, and the other is called The Lessers, which is my family novel. So I'm sort of dealing with all that in my novel. I don't think I've dealt with it a little bit. And one of the stories in my collection, which will be a chapter in my novel, is called Zelda Hamlish, and I deal with my mother a little bit there. So, but my collection is very much. I have to say that this having this collection published is really a wonderful thing for me because this is really, it sounds kind of maybe pretentious to say this, but I'll say it anyway. It's kind of like my life's work because these are the stories I wrote, the first story I wrote until one of the, and then most of the stories I wrote over, 30 or 40 years ago, 20 years ago, and some of them I wrote more recently. And I'd say the stories fall into three categories. One is autobiographical stories, stories about myself. And then there are stories based on about people I know. And then there are stories that I just make up. And those are the most fun ones to write, and those are the ones that come most easily. In fact, it was kind of funny because the one that people like, that people really love, which is called Wheatberries, and it's quoted a lot in the reviews, was one that came so easily to me that I didn't even bother sending it out because I didn't even think it was that great a story. But everyone just loves that story. So it's funny, like the things that come most easily to you sometimes can be not necessarily the best, but a lot better than you think they would be.
Yeah, it's interesting. The reason we always ask this too is that that I think the generational, obviously it's always talked about the generational divides, but I think in America during that kind of 20th century technological boom, there was a distinct difference between each generation's kind of childhood, what mom and dad did, so
Mm.
we just like to know that kind of, I grew up mostly in the 90s, so it was much different than, my parents grew up in the 50s and 60s. My father's around your age, my parents
Oh,
grew up around,
really? Oh, so what do they
yeah.
tell you about about their lives? What do they say about that?
Oh, I mean, they loved it. Yeah. I mean, most people that I talk to that grew up in kind of the suburban 1950s, 60s America really have very little complaint, at least the ones that I have from that. Yeah. It
Oh, that's
was,
isn't that
yeah.
interesting? What do they love about it? That's interesting.
I mean, I haven't gotten too specific about what, but I mean, they always
Yeah.
talk about it fondly, like the memories and the,
Hmm.
things they would do riding their bike around certain, my father grew up in a place in Baltimore where you kind of can't really grow up. I mean, you can, but it's like a much different neighborhood now. It's much more dangerous. There's more
Hmm.
crime, et cetera, et cetera. So the kind of 50s Baltimore was much different than like the current day or even the 1990s when I was growing
Yeah.
up Baltimore. It's just very different. That's where I'm from. So I'm from the Mid-Atlantic area there on Baltimore. It's funny, we just had an appointment out here, a doctor that was from Pittsburgh out here, and she's like, "Are you guys from?" She's talking to me, my wife. She's like, "Are you guys from the East Coast?" And we're like, "Yeah." She's like, "Yeah, I could hear it the minute you start talking." I was like, "Yeah, you
Oh,
can tell out here when you're on the West Coast, who's
so
from East and
you were
West."
brought up in the suburbs then,
Oh yes, yes,
and
suburban
you were
childhood.
okay with the
Oh,
suburbs.
I loved it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I still live it. I crave it. I hate city living. Yeah,
Th-
too many people, too many freaks, too many people in my way. Yeah,
That's
that's
so
how I
interesting.
feel
Isn't
about
that
it. Yeah,
interesting the way people are? Because
yeah.
for
Oh, I
me it
think it
was
is
just
generational. I think it is generational too, because I think in some degree,
well,
where it
except you
did
said your
feel more
father.
trapped. Like,
Well, except you said your father loved growing up in the suburbs,
well,
and
technically he grew up like in the city, like kind of Highland town, but not like heart of the city, but
yeah,
yeah, technically the city.
yeah.
My
I don't know
mother
what
was
it.
more suburban, and she talked about loving it. Yeah, but it's going to keep coming up. It's a theme on the podcast. That's the only reason I was curious about it, thinking about it. Go. You answered this somewhat already. The next question is always, well, when did reading and writing come into your life? Was that something you always did? Is it something that came later in life? It's weird. It sometimes ebbs and flows, right? Like I mean, so we just like to ask writers, how did you discover this kind of craft? This reading and writing, that you really enjoyed it, that you got pleasure out of it. When did that happen? And sometimes maybe it's not even a specific moment, but
Well,
like,
it's an
yeah,
interesting thing. Like, I'm always surprised. I mean, I always wanted to be a writer, right? And it was always my ambition. Um, and one again that I didn't realize until I was 32, which again seemed pretty late to me. And what is it that makes someone want to be a writer? That's such an interesting question, right? I mean,
oh
I think
yeah,
it's kind of audacious, the idea of being a writer, not being a journalist or being, any other kind of writer, but being a fiction writer,
right,
or being a memoirist, which I am at times. What really drives that? I'm really thinking about it now, okay, as we speak. And I think it's just a drive to know, to find the truth, to find your truth. And I don't think it's really as audacious as it seems, because it starts with a very personal need. I'm enjoying talking to you, Andrew, because I really do find you're sort of like inspiring me to think about these things. I think, I guess all my life I've been looking for the truth, my truth, and an objective truth.
right,
And I think that's what drives my writing. And so really, it really isn't so audacious after all. After all, I do write ultimately with a reader in mind. I never, for example, quote unquote, journal. All
right,
my writing is professional, quote unquote, writing. Um, except for my letters, which can be very stupid. I think that's what it is. It's all about finding my truth. And I think that every writer um, writes about him or herself, even if you're not really necessarily directly writing about yourself, because you're always writing from your own point of view.
right,
And I do find I have a very strong point of view. And again, and I've said this before, that I, as soon as I started writing fiction, I had found my voice. And I know what it's like not to write with a voice, and that's really repulsive, that you can really disgust yourself. And I would say that I can still write things that really make me want to throw up.
right,
But through the process of editing and then having in particular, my husband read my work, he's also, as I mentioned, a writer. I managed to get rid of all the mushy gushy stuff and hone it down to the basics.
right.
And something that I feel is art.
Yeah, and the question we like to ask going off that are, who were some of the first writers that you were enamored with? Or, who are your go-to idols and inspirations, in the world of letters? And this can be anything, it doesn't have to be high-minded literary, although it can be. We love that on this podcast. But, we also love, silly, books or
Yeah, well,
children's
I have
books,
a real
yeah.
problem reading anything that's not literature, which is really, I feel like that's really a problem of mine. But for sure, I would say that when I started writing, I was constantly, I really I learned how to really develop my art by studying the writers that I most admired. And for sure, John Cheever is up there. He's my favorite short story writer. I think he's just everything I would want to aspire to being. He was irreverent, he was funny, he was ironic, he was deep, he was true. And I would go to him over and over again just to sort of study him. And then there was Flannery O'Connor. And her perspective was so dark and kind of twisted and interesting. And I would study her. Sometimes I would just read a story of hers over and over again. Same with John Cheever for a story I was writing, and and I can have to say that none of my stories seem derivative. Although I can say that I know some writers, I can read some writers, and I can just pinpoint it. I won't mention them, but I guess I could or I couldn't. And they just every story is I can just see who
Right.
where they got that story from. So anyway, so that's how I learned how to write. And I, again, I wrote, and then I guess I basically honed my craft by learning from my favorite writers. And then of course there was Philip Roth, just really goodbye Columbus stories, and I depended on him. I know for one story I wrote in the collection called The Uncle, which is a love story. There are a few couple of love stories in the collection. Um, that story, I kept on going back to the Good Black Columbus story to sort of like somehow to absorb whatever it was that he did that he accomplished so well.
Yeah.
And I was able to do that with that story. And I really don't think that I could have done anything as well if I hadn't really relied on the writers I loved. Now, that said, I feel like I'm very deficient as a writer because I really can only read the writers that I love. And you can see like these are all the books. These are all my husband's books. He's a voracious reader, right? And I feel like I can only read the writers that I love. And that's a problem for me.
Still, I mean, you mentioned two of the masters of the craft, particularly the short story. I mean, O'Connor is one that was grappled with, and then people were trying to not grapple with her now. But I mean, you can't deny how good those stories are. I mean, you cannot deny how good she was as an artist. This is, A Good Man Is Hard to Find might be one of the best short stories ever written. I mean, these are
Oh
like
yeah, yeah. No,
incredible
it's just
stories.
yeah.
Cheever, I know he was really inspired by O'Hara, back in the day, Butterfield 8 and those types of things, Um, so yeah, we just love hearing that the kind of what writers are the ones that inspired you to be like, I want to do this, like kind of, yeah, I think I can do this. And we've had other
Yeah.
writers say that rewriting of one of their favorite stories, like just trying doing that is sometimes helps you to figure out how did they do that? How did they
Oh
create that?
really? Oh, they actually write. I didn't
Or,
know that.
just copy it out into a notebook or something. How did these words together make you feel this thing? Like not everybody does this, of course, but some, it's a craft exercise. It's kind of understanding, trying to break, almost like sentence diagramming, but not like, but for
Oh, that's
creative
interesting.
stuff?
Yeah, I never did that. And also I could say that I wasn't inspired to write by other
Oh,
writers.
really?
No, I wasn't. Um, I my inspiration for writing was completely personal and internal. But when I started writing short stories, that's when I really found my inspiration as a writer. I mean, in terms of crafting my stories. Um, so and that was, enormously helpful for me. And now like I'm writing a novel, for example, one of the novels I'm writing two at once, if you can believe it. But they're a very long time. I've been writing them for a very long time. So I went to Somerset Maugham, who I really is underrated. And I wanted to write a character who was innocent and compelling. And so I went back to oh God, Larry in oh God, why can't I remember? Oh, Razor's Edge, right? And I was just reading him and trying to see, well, how can I really create that character? And it takes a few touches. You don't have to always do a lot to create a character.
Yeah.
You can just create a true, very, very pinpointed touches.
Yeah, it's a constant theme on this podcast where, because this is the type of show we like the details about craft and how you craft things, and not just how you do it, but why and where, and this kind of that's what makes a great work of art where yeah, everybody has this backstory. You could spend years writing out a backstory, bank accounts, all the family history you could, but does the story need it? Does the novel need it? Does the character need it? And sometimes that answer is yes. And sometimes, most of the time the answer is no, right? But you can do, depending on how much you want to do. Like the example I always put out is just because I'm reading it right now. I'm reading Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks from
Oh
1901.
yeah.
And it's just, his detail is a ridiculous amounts of detail, but it actually really enhances what you're reading, So like a more modern novel or something that I'm trying to do doesn't require all that detail, but his stuff, just the work of art kind of dictates how you go about it. That's just something we're fascinated by on here.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of
Yeah.
I think a lot of what a writer has to do. I forget who said that. You have to kill your darlings.
Right. Yeah.
Who said that? I forget. It's
I'm not
attributed to
sure. Yeah.
Hemingway. You
Yeah.
never heard that before?
I've heard it, but I'm not sure who actually said it. It's one
Yeah,
of
I
those
forget who
things.
said it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, lots of times you'll have to cut out your favorite lines, your favorite paragraphs, your favorite scenes because it doesn't serve the entire body of work. And for me, rhythms of sentences are so important. Sometimes for me, writing is like music. And so I have to really, the rhythms have to be just right. And I use repetition a lot. And in fact, sometimes my husband, we edit each other's work and, he'll want to, oh, you're repeating yourself too much. No, it's my rhythm. So I'm really very much attached to that. And,
Any,
again, yeah, go
well, I'm
on.
curious now that you say that. Any poetry background or anything, or any poems that because you said I mean, with rhythm and yeah, repetition, these kind of, they're poetic elements that come into literary fiction, like,
Well, I
I'm
would
just
say
curious. I'm
that
just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would say that, I mean, I love, I always loved Dylan Thomas.
Oh, yes.
And I say that even, some poems of Wallace Stevens, and these are two very difficult poets, and I can't say that I really understand them, but I would say um that oftentimes um a poet um I'm going to just make a little segue here. First,
Let's
I'll
go
just
for
say,
it. Yeah, please.
I'm going to just say, like a poet, sometimes it's the rhythm and the sound of the poetry that gets
Yeah.
to you. And it's interesting because, I have an adult child with autism, and I've been hiring people to work with him. And I've been looking for someone to really take over the program for me. And I hired a woman, her name is Dana, and it turned out she's a very gifted poet. So I've actually really learned a lot about poetry because we've been exchanging each other's work. And so my husband and I have been editing her poems, and she's been editing our novels, right? And it's, really wonderful. And, she's very gifted and it's wonderful. And it's so interesting editing her poems because I really do find, like, in the process of editing her poems, I'm really learning a lot about poetry. I'm learning that there have to be certain elements in a poem that have to really get the point across. There has to be a certain amount of clarity. But then there has to be a certain kind of like ineffable beauty about the poem. And that doesn't necessarily have to make logical sense. And so I'm learning a lot about poetry just by editing her work. And it's been a very rewarding process. And it's been great. I also, I love editing other people's work too. It's a lot of fun for me. And I do learn a lot from it. And I'm good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious when you mentioned those elements. I was like, huh, yeah, yeah. It's something that I think isn't thought about that often in contemporary kind of literary fiction or nonfiction, the rhythm, the beauty. I mean, of course, there are plenty of people out there that are doing that, but yeah, when I read, like you talked about style and prose style, sometimes you read things that are just so boring that you're just like, okay, well, maybe you could pay a little bit more attention to the rhythm or the images here or something, how the sentence reads to people, all that kind of stuff. But this is what this podcast is all about. So I was just curious. But
Yeah,
one,
well, I find like I was trying to, I feel like I should read some books that aren't pure literature, right? And so I decided to reread The Manchurian Candidate, right? When I remember I've read so few books, that aren't literature. And I remember reading it, decades ago and really loving, and now I'm reading it, and I'm really annoyed by the prose style.
Right.
So I find like I'm really,
There's like a clunkiness to the kind of pop novels that like it's not quite paying attention to, like you said, the rhythm and all of this and
yeah, and I wish
how
I
it
weren't.
feels in your head even as you're reading it out. Like,
Yeah, and I wish I were. I wish I could be more open to that. I really do, but I can't.
No, we love snobbery on this, but we do. We love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
can't say that I'm exact. I really do wish I could just enjoy a trashy book. And Manchurian Trinity isn't necessarily a trashy book,
Right. Yeah,
but the
right.
prose file is just not up to my standards.
Yeah.
Um, and then, I can talk about, I mean, like other writers. Oh God, I mean, she's so brilliant. Edith Wharton. Oh my God, her prose style is magnificent,
It's one of my
and
favorites.
um,
Yeah.
and um, you know, oh God, not The Age of Innocence. What's the,
I was going to ask you about this because I think I saw when I was researching this that you mentioned House of Mirth is one of your
that's such an
favorite
amazing
novels.
book. I
And
mean, how many books
yeah,
can really, I feel like one of the great tests of a writer is, can you bring your reader to tears?
right.
She really does that. And I don't know, I
In
can't think
almost
of,
every single one of her novels, almost every single book too. She was, I love Edith Wharton. She's one of my favorite writers. I think she's one of the greatest American novelists to ever live. And when you read those, and of course, Age of Innocence is the big Pulitzer, everybody knows it, and you should know it because it's fantastic. It is heartbreaking. It is so good when you get to that final ending there. All of her stuff, The Custom of the Country, Ethan
oh,
Frome.
that's such a funny
Uh,
book too. It's such a
yeah,
funny book.
that might be her
Um,
funniest. Yeah, but House of Mirth specifically, we've covered it on this podcast even because I'm a huge Edith Wharton fan. So I was just curious, what about that book? You said it was the prose style. You said it was everything. Was it the glamorous lifestyles? Was
no,
it
no, I
the
don't like glamorous lifestyles at
really
all. No, it was just the character of
Lily Bart?
Lily Bart. She was um such a such a
Yes,
tragic figure,
Shakespearean level
and then in the
tragedy.
course of her life, it's been so long since I've read it, but she actually discovered her truth after having pursued the superficial, but at heart she was not a superficial person. And I think that's also something that I'm very interested in as a writer. I'm interested in um I'm interested in how people deceive themselves. Um, I guess you could call it self-denial. And I'm really interested in that. And lots of times, it's sort of like the end of The Wizard of Oz, where you sort of get the curtain, pull the curtain back and you see the Wizard of Oz was just this man behind a curtain. Um, and I really like doing that in my stories. I've done that in a few of them. In Mary Grace, I did it. Where I have this very optimistic character. She's just everything is so great. And the me character. And again, I often change myself in various stories. Like I'm not necessarily myself, but the character that I sort of model against myself in that story is someone who's sort of lost and just feels like, oh God, my point of view is so negative, it's so horrible, like, and then I meet this woman, Mary Grace, and she's so optimistic and everything's so wonderful. And the me character decides that she's going to really learn something from this wonderfully optimistic woman, and she's just enthralled with her. And then in the end, she discovers that this woman's optimism is built on sand, and that it's really, she's really being optimistic and looking at things, at her life and everything in her life as though it's so wonderful, and when in fact it's really horrible. And then the me character ends up sort of realizing, well, this is sort of, I guess, a line from the story, I think. I guess at least I was honest with myself, or at least I was truthful, sort of. And so that was, one story that I, pursued that theme with, self-denial. And then another one that I pursued that theme with was also in happiness. And that's about a woman who has a boyfriend who, everything is just great in her life. And she has this boyfriend, and everything's just great. They're both sort of like these very, very kind of practical, driven people. They keep all their schedules and they do everything by schedule and by performance and accomplishment. But there's this one thing missing. Their sex life is horrible. And she keeps on sort of pushing it away. And then in the course of the story, she she's pushing it away, and then throughout the story and moments of story she has glimmers of truth about how distraught she is over this. And that is very interesting to me, in my own life and also in the people, the lives of people I know, about how much people hide from themselves and refuse to face the truth about themselves. So that's, I would say, I'm going to get my book. One second, because I'm going to go look at it. One second, I'll be right back, okay? So, looking at my book, I really am interested. I'm interested in those. That seems like a theme of mine.
Yeah, well, what you saying that makes me think. I didn't plan to ask you this, but now I'm thinking about it. And this is a theme on the podcast too. We like to recurring themes that always come up when we talk about art and writing.
Yeah.
Optimism. Well, is optimism a choice? I think about this often too, because I think about, romanticizing something in your life. That's a choice sometimes, not always. And I like romanticizing things. Like it's a huge. I'm trying to lead through this podcast and other various formats of romanticism
What say that?
revival.
What say that again? Say that again, Andrew.
I'm
Say that again.
trying to lead through this podcast and other avenues here, kind of a romanticism revival where I feel like we're being a little too cynical about certain things. But I don't know. I just wanted to ask you about since it's the theme in your work, like you said, you've throughout your entire body of work. I don't know, optimism as a choice, optimism or even negativity as a choice, or even I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to get too bogged down. I was just thinking of it. I didn't prepare for it.
Yeah,
So I
well,
don't know. Your thoughts. Your thoughts, Maxine. Yeah.
I would say that for me, I'm very much a romantic, no
Yeah,
question
most
about
writers,
it.
yeah, most writers, yeah.
However, I feel like if romanticism is not balanced by a certain degree of cynicism, then it's boring and not realistic, because I'm
Right.
ultimately a realist. Um, but I'm very much attached to um, romantic ideas of love and
Right.
beauty.
Yeah.
But I always balance it out. Um, and so for sure, I would say that I think that all my stories, and I think they always embrace beauty and
Yeah.
truth, and goodness and hope, even though they're very much balanced by some very dark realities. Um, um, for example, the Fogman.
Making me want to quote Keats here, where we go
Oh yeah, beauty. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That's the ultimate truth. That's the ultimate line for any writer.
yeah. That
I
is
think
all you
so.
need on earth and all you need to know. Yeah.
It really is. I feel like that really is true.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and I'm glad that and then, as I wrote, in one of the stories that I'm writing now, one of the novels I'm writing now, I write about that and I talk about it. I speak about how a lot of people just get that knocked out of them at a very early age.
It's partly why I
That
ask about childhood for writers and stuff, because children have that natural kind
would
of
say that again, that
that's partly why I ask about childhood for writers and artists here, where because there's a romantic childlike sense. People always call it childlike when you're creating for a living or something, and I think there's some truth to that, because it is this kind of almost blind or ignorant kind of romanticism, right? We're like romanticizing like our little possessions or whatever it is, like our little trinkets on our desk, these little, and then the writers see that and give it to everybody else too. But you should romanticize this thing or this relationship or this, whatever it is, anything, whatever the topic of the story is or something. I don't know. I'd like to ask
yeah,
about
well, you
that because
have
I
to
think it
do
is
that.
related. Yeah, it is related.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely think that is true. And maybe that is one of the driving forces of writing, is to romanticize and um, to find the best of everything while also finding the worst.
Yeah.
So
But
it's
they go
kind of
hand in
like,
hand. It's like a yin and yang, right? You can't have the best without also having the worst, right? Like,
yeah, I don't think you can have true happiness unless you've known true sadness.
right.
And sometimes I know that the sadness can just be completely overwhelming and make you forget that you were ever happy.
Right.
And then and then you just sort of have to say, well, I remember I was happy once, I was happy once, I was happy once, I was happy once, I'll have to be happy again, happy to be happy again, right? Yeah. But it doesn't seem possible, right? Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. You think all writers are moody?
It depends. I think there's definitely like maybe that personality is more inclined to the creative arts. Um, I don't, yeah, but I think there's definitely, I mean, I went to MFA, like art school, grad school kind of stuff. So like you meet a lot of those types. So it
Yeah.
is like, yeah, there's definitely it attracts a certain type. And then it comes down to doing the work of it, because of course you're attracted to it because it's cool. You can be edgy, you can be tender, you can be, ooey gooey, smothered, like kind of with love, maybe too much. I mean, you can do all these things. So it attracts maybe people that are more in tune with that kind of emotional, highs and
Yeah, I don't,
lows.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
of a friend of mine, Marion Thur, who's, a wonderful writer, and she's written a lot of novels and stuff, and she's not a moody person,
Right.
yet somehow she can sort of see
Yeah.
things. Um, so sometimes you don't necessarily have to be a moody person
Right.
to write. But I don't know, being a moody person, I go back and forth from being very dark and being very happy. I don't think I have a diagnosis of bipolar, but I definitely do that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do you learn from do you think I mean, I don't know, Andrew, like, do you go through periods of real dark periods?
Of course. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
do you feel like
absolutely.
you learn from them?
Oof. Yes and no, of course. Yeah, I think I have reached a point in my life. I'm in my mid 30s now. I'm 36, and I feel like I've reached a point where I might have gotten all I could, artistically at least, from those kind of darker moods. Because then you feel them, and it's kind of like I know what's going to happen here. Like I'm used to that feeling now in a certain way. So I'm almost kind of at this point in my life, I'm searching for something else, or I'm almost bored with it. But I don't know. I think of that kind of like you can. I don't want to say you can't learn from those moods, but I feel like there is like is there that much to be learned from it? I
Yeah,
wonder.
I don't,
Like,
I mean, I'd
yeah,
rather really, quite frankly, not have it.
right.
I think I've had enough of it, right?
Yeah,
Really
your whole life.
have.
Yeah, yeah,
But I do feel that that as a writer, you have to know what that is,
right.
and you have to somehow have your writing be informed by it. And I think your happiness has to be informed by that. I
What?
think it's kind of like really a melding of the two. I think you have to really that one can't go without the other.
Yeah,
And I know that I'm just looking at my collection now, and I would say that every single story in my collection has darkness in it and also
right.
light. And and I think that's what I need in any writer. I think I can't read a writer without a writer who doesn't have a sense of irony. I really need that. Um, so, and I guess, I don't set out to sort of do that. I think that I think that the best writing comes from the unconscious mind. Like, how does it work? Like, you're typing, right? I mean, I used to write in longhand, in number two pencils on yellow pads. That's how I started writing, right? And then I went to manual typewriters,
Right.
and then I went to cutting and pasting. I'm really curious to know how writing has evolved. When I think of all the changes I make electronically, the number of changes, how could I possibly have made all those changes when I was cutting and pasting? I don't know. Um, but
We forget how hard it was. Yeah. I know that I like Bret Easton Ellis, the author
what?
I like the author Bret Easton Ellis, who he wrote American Psycho was
Oh, oh,
his big
oh.
one, and he has a podcast that's interesting and stuff. But he talks about this when he said he was writing American Psycho. He had an IBM Electric typewriter. It was the 80s into the 90s there, in like the late 80s, early 90s when he was writing it.
Hmm.
He's like, I did 5 drafts on that thing. He's like, I did 5 drafts on that electric typewriter. He's like, I can't even. And he said, thinking back now, now he does everything on a laptop or whatever or a computer. But he said, thinking back, it's hard to even remember how I did that. Like, yeah, how I did five
Yeah,
drafts of this
I don't even know. I mean,
winding
I do.
500
I mean,
page
how many
novel. Yeah.
drafts do I do now? Like 100, 200, 300,
Right.
400. I
Right.
mean, really.
It makes it
Um,
easier, but yeah. You had to
yeah, and
really want it
also,
back then. You had to really want it back then, Maxine. Yeah, you had to really want it when you had to handwrite the legal pad, then
well,
type it up on the
you didn't
manual.
know what,
Yep.
that was the only thing that was possible.
Right, right.
So,
Yep.
so that was it. But,
No autocorrect, no spell check, no, yeah,
oh,
no
well, one
grammar
thing I
check. Yeah.
really hate, oh my God. It's like I had to do these interviews, right? And I wrote all my questions, and somehow Chat GPT got into my answers. It was such an invasion. And so now, I had to figure out how to get rid of that. And then in my emails, I'm being told how to respond to emails. I mean, it's
Hmm.
crazy.
Oh yeah.
The whole world has been sanforized. It's just been, it's really, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I think that, in human relationships, everything. But, I don't want to talk about that because that's not my world. That isn't my world.
Yeah.
My world is a very personal world. And one of my first stories, I addressed, a stroke of luck, okay? Um, And that story, I guess another theme that I sort of like pursuing in my stories is sort of like the worshiping of false idols, right? And I'd written this story, which is kind of funny. It was one of my first published stories. It was published in the Southern Review. And I wrote that story actually because I had been offered the garden apartment in the building I was living in, and I turned it down because my boyfriend at the time didn't want to live on with anyone living over his head. He wasn't even living with me, right? And then I was so upset about that because I ended up owning that apartment. Um, it was and so I wrote this story basically about someone who lived in a garden apartment. That was the premise, right? And that story was about a young man who was just in love with all the accoutrements of success. Um, um, Climbing up the ladder of success, dressing for success, doing all the, having his apartment decorated, like someone who was successful. And then he had this party inviting all these other people who just clamored for success, right? And really, that's what their lives were about. But somehow there was something naive about him. And he really wasn't truly one of them. And I found that to be, I guess, the tragic element of that character. And that was one of the few stories that I wrote out of whole cloth.
Yeah.
Come to think of it.
Well, but that one thing I wanted to ask you is, why the short story form? What is it about that form that attracts you creatively?
Well, I think that for one thing, I don't think that I really felt capable of writing a novel. Um, and but having written a novel, 3 novels, but 2 of them are novels and short stories, and one of them is a novel. I really much prefer the short story form because I feel like it really distills reality, and it's like a poem, and there's a real rhythm and a shape to it, and there's such a thematic coherence to the short story.
Yeah.
And it really pinpoints what you want to say. And you start a short story pretty much knowing what you want to say. And then you're building the story around that theme. Whereas a novel, there's a kind of diffuseness about it, where you have to sort of fill it in with more plot and more things that aren't sort of necessarily um, um, distilling the theme. And so
Yeah.
I really do prefer the short story form. And I love the short story form. And I don't know why it's not popular now because with people's short attention spans,
You would
you
think,
think,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know why that is. But I love writing short stories. And I'm really, one of the novels I'm working on now is basically a bunch of short stories. And I have to tie them together.
Right.
For Queen for a Day, actually, what I did was I wrote a bunch of short stories about the mothers of children with autism, right? And then when I got the contract for publication, the editor and publisher and I decided to turn into a novel and stories. And so that was a very interesting process,
Right.
weaving together those stories in creating a novel out of them.
Yeah.
And I spent months doing that, sometimes working for, I think it was just about the happiest time of my life because I was like nonstop writing and
Right.
like, I would stay up sometimes 26 hours a day just writing and just really being happy. And finally, I did find there was a theme running through
Yeah.
all of them and a way to tie everything together.
Yeah. I like that. We were just curious because the forms. This is we're obsessed with it. It's a constant theme on the podcast. We like to ask all writers, all guests that come on here about their chosen form and why. Poets, memoirists, fiction, novels, all that. And as you know, the screenwriter and novelist Nick Pizzolatto, he said this once, and I think it's true, where they were talking about short form, kind of fictionalized creative work. So he was obviously he works in screenwriting. They were talking about movies, and he said, a movie can be perfect like a short story can be perfect because it's short form. It has to be perfect for it to like work in this way. Whereas a novel and a TV series or any other kind of longer form stuff, you can have these kind of ebbs and flows. You can have parts that are a little tangent or whatever, and little flaws here, because it all kind of evens out and you have a good story no matter what.
Mm.
But those shorter form ones, you have to fit it in the 90 minutes in a movie, or you got to fit it into, at less than 25 pages or something for short stories. I guess they technically cap it in the industry at like 40, but most short stories are around 25 pages. So I mean, it just you have to. It's an elegant storytelling form where poetry is another one. My background's poetry, so I think that a poem can be perfect, and then these longer form things have room for more flaws and more things. So it's just interesting to think about the form. And I was just curious, if, like you said, the stories just kind of took shape that way, if you set out to say, oh, I'm going to write a short story collection, or like you said, you thought you were writing a short story collection that turned out to be a novel and short story, it's kind of these things that just kind of happen in the creative process. So we're always just curious about that on this show.
Yeah, well, I certainly, for Queen for a Day, I really, it was very interesting.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
interesting, actually. I think it was almost more interesting writing those stories as discrete stories than it would have been if I had written them as a novel in stories.
Right.
Because I actually discovered, and I'll just go off on a little tangent here. Because I was going to say that I discovered that it could be a novel, that it was a
Right.
novel, because there was so much coherence to what I
When
was
you mentioned
doing.
the themes overlapping, and then all of a sudden you start seeing these
Yeah,
threads, and you can connect the threads, and yeah.
yeah, like I would say, like, because for example, my husband, again, like lots of times when he's reading what I write, he'll point out things I did, and I
Right.
had no idea that I did them. I mean, I feel like other people could write a lot more, could say have a lot more to say about my work than I do, because
Right.
I don't really think about it all that. I mean, I don't think about it all that much. I mean, basically, what I do is I write again what comes to my unconscious mind. And it's so wonderful when that flows. I mean, I'm sure any writer knows the terror, the horror of not being able to access that. It's hell on earth. It really is. It's a different kind of hell. But being able to access the unconscious mind, as far as I'm concerned, is what's really essential for any writer. And then there's the craft. Dylan Thomas has that line, in my craft and sullen art, right? Does he call it a sullen art, do you think?
I mean, Thomas, I guess you can point to how he grew up over there in northern UK, kind of stuff with I guess you can point to that era, maybe. I don't know. There was this tendency, and I think I see it in poetry. I noticed this in grad school. There was this high respect for the dark or sullen type themes and things like that. There was like an emphasis. You go to T.S. Eliot and these type. There's always a little bit of darkness, even in something like Emily Dickinson. Yeah, just a little bit of a dark cloud over those very happy, rhymey, cheerful things. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just part of humanity that we like to have this little bit of sullenness or this little bit of who
I don't know. I
knows?
mean, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I mean, I love the line. I mean, I love his lines, and I mean, there are a few of his poems that you can understand, like I can understand. I don't think I'm that good at reading, at understanding poetry. I don't really think I am. Um, but of course, do not go gentle into that good night.
Right? His most
It's
famous
so
line. Yeah.
but I really do feel like in terms of what I write, like why do these stories occur to me? Basically, stories occur to me. Sometimes there's a story I want to write about my life, right? And so like the missing kidney, for example, that's a story it's sort of a coming of age story. And that's about my my life after my graduation from high school. I mean not from high school, from college, and going to the city, and it's mixed in with a love of with the first boy I was in love with, the first boy who loved me. And so I write about events of my life, and that was something I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about that part of my life because it just seemed to be something that I was compelled to write about. And then Ed Milk was another story that I was compelled to write about because that was about this really misguided this was something that happened to me that I had this regular job, and then this guy comes in with this ridiculous proposal about starting a community shopper, and that I was going to, be independently wealthy, which I could never care about. So I spent 9 months doing this horrible job, right? And then I ended up having a quasi-nervous breakdown over it because it was horrible. And so the way I wrote that story was to turn the central character of the story, called Ed Milk, into a comical character. So the way I'm talking about, like, how do you write about the most painful incidents of your life? This
Right.
was a very painful incident. So the way I wrote about him was to sort of ridicule him. And I built the story and I made it into sort of a Gogolian kind of story, right?
Right.
Where where the characters were almost comical, but again, there was also a thread of very serious thread running through it.
Yeah.
So, how do you write it? How do you, decide to write stories? Like The Baby, I wrote The Baby, which I completely made up. And I feel like I don't have that much of imagination really when it comes to making things up. But that story occurred to me because there was my husband's I was sitting at the kitchen table with my husband's parents, and there was a woman who had just adopted a baby, and the baby was just petting itself. So I built that story around the baby petting itself. And I built that story about a couple who adopted a baby who ultimately rejected them. Baby, they wanted to have something to love them, and then the baby ultimately rejected them because it just had learned how to take care of itself because it was so alone,
Yeah.
in the orphanage. So, um, anyway, I'll let you ask me more questions, but I'm just like looking at my book and kind of like thinking about how these different stories occur to me because I didn't really think about it before.
Well, that's one thing we do talk about a lot on this. One of the questions too is the how autobiographical. Everybody, this is a thing. I don't know when it started, and maybe it's always been the case. It was very hot in the 20th century into the 21st here with people treating, when a reader reads your stuff, they think they're discovering something about your life in some way. So they start projecting, this happens in poetry a lot too, when you hear people talk about it. They assume that the author is the person in the story, right? There's like this assumption, and maybe it just has to do with our ape brains, our monkey brains still, that we just automatically associate, well, you wrote this, even though it's about these characters that are not real,
Yeah, well, I
We're
love
like, well,
that.
it must be about you. Like,
I love that
yeah,
question. I love that
yeah.
question
How autobiographical,
because
yeah.
I really love that question because it's so funny, right? Because the thing is, oh, Andrew, I better go and get a plug, okay? It's okay, right?
Hmm.
And also, I have to get
Yeah,
my
please.
phone out of here because I was all ready to talk to you on the phone. So I'll be back in about 2 minutes, okay?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Dane. I'm in the middle of an interview, okay? Yeah, that's okay, honey. I mentioned you in the interview too. Okay, I'll call you back later, okay? Okay, bye. Bye. I have my plug. Okay. Hi, Andrew. I'm back.
All
I
right.
actually had the plug the whole time. I just had to get rid of the phone. I love that question. I really love that question. And I actually, I've addressed that question before, right? And what's so interesting is, um, and I am a very autobiographical writer. I really am. Although again, I'm sick of myself and
Right.
I really want to go into something else. And I can, right? But the thing about an autobiographical writer is, you know, you're just going to write about the things you want to tell about expose about yourself. And sometimes you write things about yourself that aren't true at all,
Right.
just because they serve the story, right? Um, and so yeah, so you should really I feel like the ultimate truth of a writer is not really revealed in the actual details of what he or she is writing, but really in the voice of that writer. And some writers, like I know people complain about Shakespeare not having an individual voice, right? Um, and my oh God, what's the name? I have to think of that. And then there's some brilliant writers who write just expansive works, and there's no them there, right? And I always like to find the voice of the writer. Who is that writer? Um, and like Nabokov does that. Like, not it's hard to find Nabokov in his
Yeah.
stories. But Cheever, I know Cheever. I feel like I know Cheever, not because of the details of what he's writing, but because of his voice and his point of view. And that's really where you find the writer. But my stories are very autobiographical, and I would say that actual the actual kind of like launch pad of my stories are definitely based on me, but I will veer into all sorts of other territories to serve the story. I'll make stuff up.
Right.
And so, reader, I know like this old boyfriend of mine told, people used to ridicule Philip Roth all the time. Because of, him masturbating to a piece of liver, right?
Right.
And so I remember once someone, was like, he said he was standing online in some, restaurant, and some person says to him, "Well, I hope they're not serving liver there." But you don't know, did he really masturbate to a piece of liver? I don't
Right.
know. But he could say that, right? And so you can say anything about yourself. But if there are things about yourself you don't want to reveal, then you're not going to write them, or else you'll maybe write them in such a way that you're not exposing yourself.
Right.
So I think an autobiographical writer, paradoxically enough, is hiding behind his or
Right.
her autobiographical writings. And I feel that I do that, although I don't do that because I'm also speaking my truth. So it's kind of dichotomized, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the
It's
way I feel. But um, but yeah, so I do feel that it's all about speaking your truth. And however that's going to happen, and it's not going to necessarily be in your truth is not in the details. It's in your voice.
yeah. That's a constant theme on the podcast too, where we ask, we covered Irving's The World According to Garp
Yeah, I started
recently,
listening to that podcast. Yeah, but
and
then I was interrupted. I never have time to listen to anything. I've never time for anything. Okay, but go on.
and one of the things that I still think about here, because I think it touches on a theme that we always talk about, is like when he's talking to his wife and he's, a struggling writer in that, and he's struggling to write something, his wife says to him, are you're the difference between creating and remembering, right? Like, and I think that's a big, big dichotomy between, especially when you think about kind of the explosion in popularity in the last 20 years of the memoir, of autofiction, these types of things where the main character is the author. It is sort of, yeah, where is the line? And how do you craft, compelling things through that? Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting in terms of the
Yeah, I
craft
think the
perspective.
memory, because
Yeah.
sometimes I'm very frustrated.
Right.
I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember. I don't remember. Yet again, I definitely think the memory is in my heart, it's in my soul,
Right.
even if the details aren't there. Um, and then I think that, it comes about in the actual act of writing. You create your own details.
Yeah.
But I think as long as you know what you want to say, and again, that's really what the most important thing is. Like when, and that's what's so wonderful about the short story is because you really know what you want to say.
Right.
Um, so, um, so if you know what you want to say, then you can find a way to say it. If you're not sure what you want to say, then that's going to really be hell. Now, for example, okay, so this novel that I just finished, and I'm waiting to get a few people to react to it. It's called Blame It on My Youth, right? And it was based on a love affair I had with an older man. Actually, I wrote a short story. One of the short stories, Hospitality, was, touched on this man, right? And Hospitality is about a story, about a young woman who's has this love affair with this older man who's ultimately kind of repugnant to her, right? And this was really something I had to grapple with because this was a man that I had an older man that I had a love affair with. And why was he repugnant to me? Um, and that was really blocking me from writing the novel. And it made it so hard for me to write that novel because usually when I write about a character, I'm very clear about how I feel about them. And if a character is repugnant to me, then that's fun because then it becomes kind of like a piece of black comedy or absurdity, right? But this character, I couldn't write like that. So it was really very difficult for me to write that character. And lots of times I wish I'd never even started writing that book. And I think finally I kind of broke through it. And I think that probably what was ultimately repugnant to me, and that I think is what allowed me to write this novel finally, was that I was repugnant to me
Right.
because I wasn't living my truth. And I think that any writer, I mean, I don't know, is this the universal? I don't think so. Maybe a literary writer. Literary writers are writing their truth. And I think that, writers, not all of us, want to live a kind of truth.
Yeah.
And so that was really what the stumbling block to that story
It's
was,
interesting. Yeah, we had the memoirist and poet Nick Flynn on, and he said, go listen to that episode, listeners. And he said, I asked him about this, about writing memoir, putting your life, with not using kind of the lens or filter of fiction around it, but doing the kind of the lens and filter of nonfiction as a memoir, literary prose, but like real story. And I asked
mhm.
him about writing about characters that, because his whole life is basically in these series of memoirs that he's put out. His most famous one being, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, which I think is based on Brooklyn, is what he's referring to. Another Bullshit Night in Suck City.
Oh, really? That's a
Yeah,
good, that's an
but
interesting time. Yeah,
he
go on.
said, he's teaching a class, a workshop of a bunch of college students, and he
Yeah.
said, one of them was writing about their dad, and they hated him, and they made him this horrible villain, and he just said,
They
you're
made him what? Say that
they,
again. They made
they
him.
made him, they didn't like him or they didn't get along with their dad. So they made it this horrible character that was like kind of a villain,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
just said, it's less interesting, it's less good memoir writing, nonfiction kind of autobiographical writing, if you don't also try really hard to put a little light, a little good
Well,
into those characters, yeah,
that's such a good point because this is something that okay, this is a problem that I address. Again, my writing is very much combination. Some of
right,
my stories have been published. Some of my stories have been published as nonfiction because they can be either published as fiction. I'm looking for a pencil, because I want to write down what you're, saying. Um, um, I have like these enormous collections of pencils. Um, it's ridiculous. Some, okay, one second. One second. Okay. Yeah, so anyway, so yes, you could never write a character all dark. So in Queen for a Day, okay, I had this horrible experience um with this an advocate I hired to represent me, and she completely screwed me, and I hated her, and she humiliated me. And I had so much trouble. It's one of the most difficult stories I ever wrote. It's called The Story of Annie Sullivan, right? And she completely screwed me. And I just couldn't stop writing my hate. And so in order to get another angle on her, since lots of times, sometimes I can create out of my imagination, but you really do need other people to help you out. So I interviewed someone else and I gave her a whole other side, right? And no, you can't write about anything. There always has to be a certain kind of lightness to the character, a kind of light in the character.
right,
And so, yeah, so that he was very, and that's true. And that's what I do in my novel. I mean, like I'm writing about my mother, and my mother was really brutal with me, really brutal. But there were also wonderful things about her.
right.
So I don't have any problem, right? So you always have to balance it out. I mean, is there anyone pure evil? Yeah, I think Trump is pure evil. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
But that's
sorry.
yeah, I mean, the
What?
point is just, it makes for more interesting stories and memoirs and novels. If, he always says, try as hard as you can. The Nick Flynn comment was just try as hard as you can to be generous about that, because otherwise your stuff will become less interesting to read, because then it's just about, hating on this one person, as they say online, right? Like,
Yeah, no, it doesn't
yeah,
work. It doesn't
right.
work. And that's actually the problem I had with this novel, Blame It on My Youth, is I had to it wasn't, I didn't hate the character on whom he was
Right.
based, but I felt this kind of mysterious repugnance and I didn't understand what it was. And I couldn't write about someone who repulsed me. So I had to find his good side.
Right.
And I actually had to find the good side of the actual real person on whom he
Oh,
was based.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a
So that's
very,
an extra
that's a
step.
very,
Yeah.
hmm?
That's an extra step. Yeah. In terms of not just the creative having to do it for the character, but doing it in the person that you're basing it off of in real life. Yeah.
And it
Interesting.
was so hard for me. It was so mysterious to me. I mean, a lot of times in my life, I have things pretty, pretty well understood, but every now and then something comes across, crosses my path, and I'm bewildered, and I just don't know what the hell is going on.
Right.
And really, it's not until I know what the hell is going on that I can write about it.
Yeah. That's
And
interesting. I
yeah.
was going to ask, we like to, the different forms obviously are a huge theme. Do you approach the two differently? Like when you go to do a novel or a short story, or even kind of like a nonfiction article or something in journalism in the past, is there a different approach? Is there a different mental way you go about it? I mean, every writer has their own thing. Is there a difference between them? Do you
No,
have a
I don't
difference
think that
or?
I don't think I approach anything differently. I really think that, I mean, I know when I was doing journalism, I always was attracted to stories about people and the complexity of people. And so that was kind of training for my fiction writing. And I don't think so. And again, a lot of my stories, I mean, I know the first story in Queen for a Day, I originally wrote as a piece of nonfiction. And in fact, it was published in, I forget where it was, but I've had things published um, as I've said that already, as fiction that where originally wrote as nonfiction because, or as nonfiction that I wrote as fiction because they really are interchangeable.
Really? Yeah.
And if I happen to invent anything, then I'll cut it out of the nonfiction publication because I do believe that one has to be truthful about what you're writing. Um, so yeah, so I definitely feel that I approach everything from the same perspective. I feel like my writing is very much driven by my very strong emotions. And so I'm driven very strongly by my very overwhelming feelings of love and my overwhelming feelings of hate. I have my idols and I have my villains, I have my angels, right?
Yeah.
And I have, I guess I'm a person of emotional extremes, right? And I think that very much informs my writing. My emotions definitely drive me to write, yeah. And
Yeah.
then my thoughts come into it. But it's interesting because the process of writing is, there's the unconscious part where the emotions are very much driven and your unconscious is driving it and your emotions are driving your writing. And then when it comes to crafting it, there's the delightful exercise of your craft. And you're feeling, well, gee, I'm really good at this. I know what I'm doing. And so it's this sort of feeling of, mastery when it comes to crafting the sentences. Whereas when you're inventing the stories, there are kind of roadblocks, right? And you kind of like, sometimes you're just gonna not really know what you're doing. But when it comes to crafting, I feel like that's something that I've mastered.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Before we get to the final kind of craft questions we like to ask everybody, I wanted to ask you another kind of question that's specific to you is the motherhood. You already mentioned kind of the struggles with your own mother, and then of course the challenges of mothering your own children. The normal challenges that come with that, and then the additional ones with autism, as you've written about and spoken about. So just curious about motherhood, and I wanted to ask because I recently became a father like a year
Oh,
ago.
congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. And what
It's hard.
what I've been thinking about creatively with it is that I'm suddenly in touch with this kind of, the palette of emotional landscape, the palette of emotion that you could use or you could feel. I'm suddenly feeling it deeper than ever, and I feel like I'm more in touch with it than ever. And so I've been obsessed with this idea of having children, motherhood, fatherhood, enhancing your creative output because you're feeling things so much deeper than you used to, in a certain sense. I don't know. So I wanted to ask you about, do you think motherhood Again, you've written about the topic. Did motherhood add or enhance, your abilities or your vision as a creative? Did it help you change directions, or were there even, or was it just negative? I mean, any of the kind of however you want to answer that question. I know it's a big one there. Yeah, but
Well, again, my motherhood is very complicated
right,
because
yeah,
I have an autistic child. And I can say that um in terms of the actual practical effects that had on me is I couldn't write for years because I
right,
had to take care of my son.
right.
Um and I don't know. I mean, you said that somehow you feel that it has influenced your writing and what it's sort of given you another emotional depth. Like, what you want to just let me
Sure,
respond to that. Let me
sure.
hear what you have to say about that before I can respond to it.
Sure. For example, just perspective and also I feel like emotional depth. For some reason, maybe it's just me. We talked about how, kind of emotional people are drawn to the arts in a way. I
Hmm.
just feel it deeper than ever. And, like I feel even when I'm watching something stupid, like I was watching a horror movie or something the other night, it's Halloween season, and there was a kid in trouble. And I used to, before I had a child, I would feel, what you're supposed to feel when you're watching that on a story, but I feel it so much deeper to the point where I'm just like, oh my God, you're putting, maybe it's just a perspective thing. Another example where I'm thinking, I wrote this story a few years ago. I never published it, maybe I will, about
Mm.
Christmas morning. But I wrote it from the child's perspective, about the child not getting the gift that they wanted, you know,
Hmm.
and then it never occurred to me the parent's perspective of getting the wrong gift or the wrong color or whatever it is, dealing with that kind of thing. So it made me think of, I need to rewrite this story now because I need to include the actual real perspective that would happen, not just the child's perspective, the adult and the child's perspective. I don't know, something like that. And that's why I'm thinking of, maybe I'm just naive. Maybe this has already happened and everybody's talked about it already. But I don't know, I'm just feeling it all the time. And then I started thinking about art and kind of how that affects artists, how that, because the thing in art, at least my generation growing up, it was, if you have children, it's going to get in the way of you creating stuff. And I mean, in terms of like creating time for yourself, of course, that's normal, that's natural, right?
Mm.
I have to fight for my writing time, of course, but like that's
Yeah.
part of it, at least for when they're young enough, they're not going to school or activities for a certain set of time. But
Hmm.
it's like that. But also, I feel like, so it's just, I don't know. I'm just curious. It's always viewed as like a negative. It's, oh, it's going to take away from your writing. It's going to take away from your craft. And it's like, yes, that's true in terms of like the time you can spend on it. But it also, I would say, enhances your craft because now you have an understanding of an emotional depth that just wasn't in your life before. And now all of a sudden, this emotional depth, like I said, so I called it kind of like a canvas or a palette of colors. Now the colors of the rainbow are brighter than ever. You see more of them than ever, and you can use them in your, art, your expression. So I was just curious about that. And again, I know that's a crazy,
Yeah,
big, broad
well, I
question.
never, I
Please
guess,
answer it however you feel. Yeah.
yeah, well, I just feel that, okay, being a mother, first of all, I still can't believe I'm a mother.
Right.
And I have a daughter who's I cannot write about because she would kill me. And so I can't write about my daughter. But I will tell her every now and then, Sammy, I can't believe I'm a mother. And she'll say to me, I can't believe you're a mother either, which kind of tells you what kind of mother I am. But anyway, but I would say that for sure, having especially a woman having a baby, and then the act of nursing, there's this
Right.
whole other kind of love that's so you do enter a new territory, a new
Right.
depth of love that is exquisite and excruciating.
Right. Yeah.
And in terms of my writing, though, I don't really think that it affected me as a writer, except in terms of the subject, of
Right.
course. And then I wrote this whole novel about being about the mothers of children with autism. And that introduced me to, a whole new, um, being the mother of a child with autism. There's the whole new the feeling of the love and the pain, the love and the pain of loving, and so complicated by having a child who is so much in need, right?
The
For me,
guilt,
that,
yeah. The guilt even, right? The guilt of
well,
I'm
I don't
not
know.
doing
I don't
enough
think I
or
really felt guilty. I think I just felt, um, I just was so driven to do everything I could. And that's very much informs, my novel Queen for a Day, is how driven I was to do everything I possibly could. And that drivenness, is just who I am as a person. Um, and, um, and I have to say that it's kind of like what I've been used to doing all my life is taking care of other people. Um, so that was something that I did all my life, because I had this sick twin sister, and then I had this I don't want to call him, sick, damaged, son who had autism, right? Um, so that was something else to write about, but I don't know that I don't know that I had your experience of having enhanced my palette of emotions. Um, um, it added another dimension, another aspect, another definition of love to my kaleidoscope of love. Um, but I don't think it really changed me as a writer at all. Because I've always written from the depth of my emotions. So I think
yeah.
that's how I felt. And I feel like, so much being in touch with my emotions is really what um enables me to write.
Yeah.
And it's really what my writing is about. And then it's interesting, there's the thought process. There's the emotional process. I think this is maybe true of most writers. There's the emotional process that drives the writing. And then the thoughts, I think, might come in. They get mixed in with the emotions, but then when you're involved in the editing process, then the thoughts really enter into the process more directly, as do the crafting of the sentences and paragraphs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The next last couple questions here, Maxine, are all about the craft itself here, like kind of the details about it. We like to ask all writers that come on here, what is your writing routine like? How do you like to do it?
Okay, well, I used to just write all the time. And it's interesting because I used to write in cafes all the time.
Yeah.
And um and then after the pandemic, I started writing at home, and I couldn't find a place to write, which is really weird. I have a huge apartment and I couldn't find a place to write. And finally, I started writing on my son's bed. My son has his own apartment. He lives 7 minutes away from us with a neurotypical roommate. Um, so it was finding a place to write, which is really hard. You really have to find that place to write. Um, and basically, my life was all about writing. It's been all about writing. And my brother will ask me, how do you have the discipline to write? Well, it's not a matter of discipline, it's a matter of need. Because I need to write, because that's where I find myself, my center, my peace. And so I actually need to write. It's not a matter of discipline. And actually now I'm at a point, in my life, which I mentioned before we started recording this interview, where I kind of feel like, well, God, Maxine, maybe you should do something else with your life other than write all the time. So that's where I'm at now. But basically, it's always writing, writing, writing. Thinking about writing. I'll go when I go to sleep, I'll think about what I'm writing. When I wake up, I'm thinking about what I'm writing. When I go swimming, I swim. I swim for an hour a day. I try to do it 3 to 5 times a week. I'm thinking about what I'm writing, and and lately I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe I'm going through some end of life crisis or something. I don't know. That was ironic. Okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I really think that, so anyway, so for me, it's always about it's not a problem finding, getting myself down to write. Now it's a matter of Maxine, stop writing already.
huh. So is it
Starting.
just so is it just an all day thing then? You just kind of are
I do it
going
every day, yes.
and just kind of all
Time
day?
time permitting, yes.
Right,
And I do various things, things that one has to do. And then of course there's, I'm running a program for my son. And so I have to take care of that.
right.
And really, I kind of am okay, so I have this very close friend. I love her. She's she could totally be a comedian. She's brilliant, she's wonderful. I absolutely adore her. And for years, I've been telling her, Hannah, why don't you get a tape recorder? Why don't you, she's always coming up with bits, spontaneous bits, brilliant bits, right? It's gold that comes out of her mouth. And I'm just saying, and for decades, we've been friends forever. Um, and then it just occurred to me, based on something she said something, it was the context of something, her husband reading one of my drafts of a novel, saying, well, she wasn't talented and she wasn't, I forget what else she said. I don't remember. But anyway, that stuck with me. And so I wrote an email to her. I said, Hannah, you are so talented, but some people don't necessarily have the need to codify themselves. And you don't have the need to codify yourself. And well, okay, you want to live. And I said, well, sometimes, it occurred to me then when I was writing to her that maybe ambition got in the way of living. And lately I've been thinking to myself, maybe my ambition, and again, my ambition is not to be this, best-selling writer to make money over writing. I would like to get a real New York Times review rather than a blurb. Um, but I would like to be recognized for my, literary gifts. But that's not my ambition. And so I'm talking about ambition is my ambition is just to write as well as I can. But then so lately, ever since I wrote that to her, I've been thinking maybe I should try to live a little bit. So I've sort of reversed what I said to her and dumped it back onto myself. Do you ever
Sure.
think that? I mean, maybe you live, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it is something where I think that's a struggle. I think there is a tendency between artists as well to be hesitant to admit that you do want that recognition. That like, what are you toiling away for? Like, nobody wants to put on a play that nobody sees.
Mm,
Most artists would rather you go see the play and tell you and then write a review trashing it than not see it at all. Most people, as a writer, you get used to kind of people saying, "Oh, it sucks." Okay, you kind of get used to that and kind of get used to brushing that off. Let it roll off your back. But it's when nobody sees it. So if you published a book and nobody bought it, right, or nobody reviewed it, or nothing, then it feels like it's harder to motivate yourself to do the next one then because it's like,
well,
okay, what am I doing?
I
What
don't
am I
feel
doing?
that
Yeah,
way. I don't feel that way at all.
it's interesting. Yeah,
I don't feel that just because we're writing in a world now where no one reads, there are some people who read. And in terms of the reviews I get, I mean, I'm extremely gratified by,
right,
I mean, there are, I got Oprah, I got the
right,
Times, I got
yeah,
Kirkus, the best short story writer you've never heard of. Those were, those, like that's a backhanded
yeah,
compliment if ever there was one. But okay, that was great. But wow, I mean, I read this reader on Goodreads wrote this, wow, such a fulsome appreciation of my work.
right,
And that meant a lot to me. And then
yeah,
the Amazon reviews I've gotten, I'd say that they meant as much to me as the blurbs I got from the big time people. And so no, I mean, as I joke, building your audience one reader at a time.
Oh yeah.
No, I don't really care so much about that. I know my husband, he published this wonderful novel, Belcour. It's an historical novel. It's called Belcora. And he got this huge advance, $225,000 advance. He got this, it was supposed to lead Doubleday's fiction list. And then his editor was fired. It was supposed
Right.
to be, it was basically pegged to be a bestseller, and it would have been had Doubleday, had the editor had not, been fired.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so then the editor was fired. I mean, it sold over 20,000 copies, but it didn't earn
Right.
back its $250,000 advance. And so then because of that, his agent kind of left him.
Right.
Um, and so then he was sort of like left scrambling around for an agent.
Right.
And it's such a commercial world.
Yeah.
And again, like when I get a rejection for a story, like for example, like I've had stories published in very the top literary quarterlies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have one story published in a leading literary quarterly that was rejected by a form rejection 7 years before the same story, and then I just go submit it again, and it just says, "Oh, we love your story. Can we publish
Right.
it?" So you just have to sort of, it takes a while to sort of like develop a certain level of I don't want to say contempt, but you know, don't be awed. Just don't be in awe of the literary police
That's a good term for it. Yeah.
because they don't really they're not their decisions are not necessarily the right decisions.
Right.
And also in the literary quarterlies, a lot of them publish the people who had MFAs. I didn't get
Right.
an MFA, so they published the people they went to school with, right? I mean, every time I get published in a literary quarterly, I feel like I've really broken through that. Talk about the glass ceiling. Man, is there a black ceiling when it comes to the literary world? You know that, right?
Hmm.
Um, you know that, right?
Oh yes.
Um,
Very familiar.
so,
Yeah.
so I'm not breaking my heart over that. That's not what I break my heart over. I break
Right.
my heart over not being able to write as well as I want to write.
Yeah.
That's what I break my heart about, not about success.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. It's always that. I mean, this is a constant theme on the podcast because this is a writing pod, and it goes into our next question here too, because
Hmm.
we do like to ask, and we don't need any numbers or anything like that. We like to ask, how do you make a living? Do you make any money off the literature? And we ask this question because, it's tough out there for writers. People that want to write for a living, it's rough. So, you usually have to have a day job. Are you retired? How do you make a living? How do you make
Well,
a living? And
I
again, we don't need any
always made a
numbers or,
living.
yeah.
My husband and I made a living as writers. We wrote nonfiction books. We wrote a lot of nonfiction books. I never really went about earning a living. Um, looking for a way to really earn a living as a writer and, earning a big living as a writer. So that's the way we've earned a living. And
Yeah.
now we're sort of at a point where I ended up really lucking out and getting two apartments. So I own two apartments that I bought um for insider's price. So I live a very frugal existence, and I managed to sort of
Right.
I actually I have an art. I've made an art
Yeah.
of living on nothing, really.
Yeah.
And it's not, I've never really been inquisitive. I've never really, wanted to be rich. So has never been a problem for me.
That's very interesting. I think you're the second writer we've ever had on that said they actually make a living writing. Because that's maybe it's a generational where it's just very hard to do that now. We had one guy, he was a poet, and he's not a
Yeah.
poet that is, published in those literary quarterlies or anything. He is self-publishing his stuff through like Amazon and then putting it on social media and stuff,
Hmm.
YouTube. And, yeah, he's not rich, but he makes a living writing, selling his own stuff. And he was on here, and I was just so fascinated by that. I was like, yeah, it is possible. It is possible to do that. So it's just curious, and listeners like to know this stuff. Listeners are curious about this. So it's just
Yeah. Well,
fascinating how that plays
yeah, I
out.
also earned a living as a copy editor.
Right, right.
So,
Day jobs here and there with the
yeah,
books
so
and
I was
things.
always
Yes.
freelancing. Like I stopped working in offices when I was 28. I couldn't stand
Yes.
it.
I
I
think many
couldn't.
people listening can relate. Yes.
Yeah, although I sometimes I'm thinking, well, gee, maybe I should have done that more because I would have had more experience. So I
Right.
was always a freelance writer. Um, so anyway, so we sort of supported ourselves on writing,
Yeah.
but not a good living.
Right. Yeah.
And and I never really thought about I had no commercial instincts, zero
Right.
commercial instincts.
A lot of them aren't logical either. The commercial instincts, like there's no logic to a lot
I
of it.
have,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a real distaste for commercialism of any
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah.
And that's and that sort of prevents me from, I guess, trying to, like, I'm not on social media. I can't bring myself to do that. Um, I guess I'm something of a purist when it comes to
Yeah.
things like that, and I can't do that. I mean, I know people who write, crummy little books. They go on social media and all of a sudden
Yeah.
their sales are just go through the roof.
Yeah.
I just can't do that. I don't want
Yeah.
to do it. And what's the point of doing it when you're doing exactly what you wanted to do all your life, and what a gift that is? Why should you mix that in with doing something you don't want to do when your
Right.
whole life, my life, has been devoted to not doing what I don't want to do and to doing what I want to do? Why should I all of a sudden, when I get a book published, do something I don't want to do? I can't do
Right.
it. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, it's another theme on this podcast because it's just a constant thing that artists bring up, right? Corporate art. When you move over into that commercial side, you are now dealing with Fortune 500 companies. You are dealing with people that have a bottom line. They're not doing it because they like your little art project. Maybe some of the editors working in this big company are doing it for that reason. But when it comes down to it, when they're offering money and buying the rights, et cetera, it's a business. It's a
Yeah, well,
corporation.
I mean that's why I'm very
And just that the
I mean
struggle. Yeah.
I'm published by a small press,
Right.
Delphinium. I'm very grateful to them for publishing me.
Right.
Um, the big publishers, I don't think they would want to publish a short story
Right.
collection because they're not money makers. But
Right.
this publishing company does not look at the bottom, look at,
Right.
making money. And so I think that I'm very grateful to have them, and I'm very grateful for the existence of small presses.
Right.
And that's it. So I'm just grateful to be published. And
Right.
listen, my first book, I mean, I've had, a number of stories published in literary quarterlies, but it wasn't until I was 67 that
Right.
I got my first book published. And I don't know, I mean, maybe I wouldn't have known about Delphinium if it weren't for my friend Marion Thurm, who recommended me to the editor there. And maybe I don't know that I would have known about him or even known how to look for small presses. So if it
Right.
hadn't been for Marion Thurm and it hadn't been Phil Delphinian, maybe neither of my books that have been published so far would have been published. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And quality, I believe in the quality of my work.
Right.
And other people believe in it too. And I don't know that that is necessarily what determines, that definitely is not what determines what gets
Yeah.
published.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
just,
fuck it, man.
yeah. It's just one of those things, as an artist, you're constantly bumping up against it. You're constantly bumping up against the corporate art world and kind of, you want to get your book out there. You want people to see it, but then also that means sacrifices. I know even some of the hybrid publishers, we like writers that publish all kinds of different ways. So we've had people come on and talk about all their different kind of ways of publishing, whether that's
Yeah.
self-publishing through KDP or something, Amazon makes it easy.
Yeah. Well, good for them. Good
Well,
for
they were saying
them.
even with a hybrid publisher that there were some restrictions. Like there was, I don't know if it was religious or what, but they couldn't have curse words. They couldn't have certain
Really?
things. Yeah.
What's a hybrid publisher?
It's where you pay money for them to print and distribute the book for you. You're basically
Oh,
paying for the services, and they can
mm.
that ranges from, a couple grand to whatever you want to spend, depending on what kind of treatment you get. And I get why writers like that because that's the hard part, right? Is distribution, getting it onto bookstores, getting it onto all these different
Yeah, I just
websites and
can't. I
stuff.
can't get in. Yeah, that's
That's
hard.
hard, yeah. So you're always bumping up against it. There are other paths besides going into the corporate kind of side. You can do these small presses, and there are other ways. So it's just interesting how artists choose to go about it. That's why we like to ask it, and it's a theme because we're always bumping up against the limits, right? If not corporate art, well then the
Yeah, but
social
but
limits
the
or
whole
something,
idea, but the whole idea of not write, people say, why should you write if you're not going to get published, or why should you write if you're not going to make money? Well, that's not why a writer writes.
Right,
A writer writes because a writer has to write. A writer wants to write. A writer, loves to write. So, what other reason should there be for a writer to write? And so you're going to really think about whether or not it's going to be published, whether you're not making a lot of money out of it. I mean, I'm not going I'm not going to even think about that.
right,
And
yeah,
again, I have to say that I have the example of my father, who's very much, very strongly influenced by that. And I feel, I'm going to call myself Maxine, which is a name I really don't like very much. Um, I'll say, Maxine, look how lucky you are. You did exactly what you wanted to do. And my father didn't do what he wanted to do. And so how lucky to do what you want to do. And so that's my little Pollyanna side. That's my optimistic side. And I think that dark as I can be, I feel that my optimism prevails.
yeah,
And my love for people prevails over my hate for people,
right.
but that doesn't mean I don't hate, because I do.
But we just like hearing the stories. Yeah, we just like hearing that, yeah, somebody's out there doing that and being able to support themselves, however, modestly, et cetera, et cetera. We don't, so we just love hearing those stories. So, because it's rare when you see somebody that's able to do that nowadays. So it is, you're doing it. Yeah, you are doing
Well,
it here.
it was also in combination with,
Right.
the apartments, but yeah, definitely. And then what
Bye.
happened, I'll tell you what happened when my husband got that huge advance. I actually wrote an essay about it. It's called My Husband's Literary Debut. It was published. Um Blue Star, I forget, Blue Stem, yeah. And I wrote about that. And when he got that huge advance, I said, okay, we don't have to worry about money anymore, because I actually calculated how we could just, use that money. So it's really very fortunate that I'm not materialistic
Yeah.
or acquisitive.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I
that's
mean, it's
always
it's almost a sickness, actually.
yeah. The final question here, Maxine, is we like to ask, what are you working on now? What's taking up your creative energy?
Okay, well, right now, I mentioned I'm finishing up two novels. I mean, one is called Blame It on My Youth, which is a novel that was gestated, that has origins in the story of hospitality in my collection. And that's a novel that I'm finished the final draft, and I'm just waiting for three people to send me their reactions, and then I'll start sending it out. And then the other novel I've been working on for years, which is called The Lessers. It's a family novel, which is centers around my relationship with my twin sister. And It's very much a family novel, and that's a novel in stories. And I'm in the process of finishing that, and then from there I have plans for a whole other collection of short stories, which I'm going to start working on now, because I want to take a little break from what I've been doing. I want to take a break from myself, because I'm sick of myself. Like, what's so, really? I mean, again, it's not narcissism that drives a writer to write about him or herself. It's the need to find the truth about oneself and the world. So that's my little caveat. there. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
But it's,
fantastic.
I think after these two novels are finished, I'm going to be ready to enter a whole other phase of writing. And I also write essays as well. So,
Right. Well, that's fantastic.
and in fact, I wrote an essay, and I'm just hoping it gets published about my son. And then my husband wrote another essay about our writing life. And so I just hope those two get published. So, every now and then I write an essay, and that's fun.
Yeah. Well, Maxine, that was all I had. Thank you so much for coming on here.
Is it, yeah.
Where can people find you?
Okay, well, I have a website, MaxineRosaler.com, and that has like a lot of my stories in it, and I really have to update that. And then I also created a website based on it's called The Missing Kidney Rosaler, Rosaler.com, that has a lot of links to the where you can get the book. You start with Amazon if you hate Amazon, which you should. But we're all, sort of seduced by the ease of it. It's a lot of bookstores around the country. And that's where I am. And I'm all over the internet and stuff like that. And yeah, and so basically that's it. It's just like I have to go and so I did create that website, the missing kidney, rosaler.com. So that's as far as I can go with selling myself and
Yeah.
selling this book. But just one reader at a time, guys.
Yeah,
Even if it
absolutely.
happens to be, I will say this in closing, okay? When I started out writing, I only had my husband, and my husband is the most literary person I've ever known. He's read more books than anyone I've ever known. He's always reading. And when he first, when I told him I was writing a story, before he read it, he said, "Oh my God, what am I going to say?" Because he thought how could it be any good? And he loved my writing. And for years, that's all I needed was him loving my work. And that was all I needed.
Right.
And I think that should really be all anyone needs is just to know that someone else, just be one person
Of
loves your work.
course. And of course,
Okay.
listeners, Maxine's website and the links to her books are all down there in the description, linked below. Go click on it and go buy yourself a copy. Maxine, please come back anytime. It was a pleasure having you on here.
Pleasure, really. So wonderful talking to you. I had no idea. 2 hours, that's a long time. But
Yeah,
but we didn't really run it because that's one thing about writers. We never run out of what we want to say, right?
exactly. Yes, I'm very,
Okay.
very rarely speechless.
Yeah. And also, I just want to say one more thing. We can start at point A, go to point Z, and then always go back to point A. So, okay.
Absolutely.
So take care now. It's a pleasure. And as soon as I get that next book published, I hope to be speaking to you again. Okay.
Of course.
Heavy.
bored,
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
bored,
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
inner,
Resources, American resources.
being bored.
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.